Greetings, toy enthusiasts, and welcome to the first video for Toys and Takaran. I am your host, Takaran Dace, and today I'd like to ask you what you consider your classic Nerf gun. For me, it is the Nerf N-Strike Maverick. This is the first blaster I ever purchased at Zellers, no less. Some of you may not even be aware that that store ever existed. Hashtag RIP Zellers. But when I saw it on the shelf, one of the features that really attracted me to the blaster was because compared to many of the blasters I would see in my cousin's toy chest when I was a kid, looked almost nothing like anything you would find in a gun shop or anything. There was no realism, no realistic function to them, and I could see right away that this blaster had a bunch of those features, and that is why this blaster remains somewhere in, guaranteed almost in my top 10 favorite blasters of my entire collection. And yes, I definitely have more than 10 blasters. That's part of the reason I started this channel. So as to the features that really attracted me to the gun after I finally got to use it and confirmed how different it was than some of the blasters that I had played with as a child, were the grip was much more pistol-like, and it was a nice size. I started buying my blasters when I was into my 20s, so I had my adult size hand, but it's a nice comfortable grip as much as it's a kid's toy. It fits my fingers in the little recesses quite well. It has a little protrusion here that is nice to brace my pinky against, and the distance to the trigger well is nice and comfortable. Also, what I found was that the top priming was nice and smooth, easy to go forward, and then we move on to the cylinder. So one of the interesting features about this blaster is the fact that if you lightly pull the trigger, but not a full depression, even when it's locked and loaded, you can cause the cylinder to move ahead. So if for whatever reason you know that somewhere in there you've skipped a cylinder space or two, then you can just lightly push the trigger, cause the cylinder to move ahead, and hopefully find one of the darts that is still remaining in the cylinder. Also, a cool feature on the side here, we have the button that causes the cylinder to be able to pop off to the side. You can freely spin the cylinder, hopefully not staring down the barrel, and reload and be ready to rock and roll when you slap the cylinder back into place. So when it finally comes to shooting your blaster, one of the cool things about the Maverick and other blasters that were released around the same time, 2005, and hopefully that doesn't date me too much, was the fact that the blasters around that time were still released with these suction tip darts, which always made a pretty cool sound. Hopefully that came over on the camera. But that, for me, that was one of the most satisfying things about using this blaster, since most of the time I was just playing by myself. I would just try and make as tight a grouping as I could on the window while enjoying that thwop, thwop, thwop sound on the window. Moving on to some features that I'm maybe a little less impressed about with the Maverick, would definitely include this tactical rail on top of the loading slide to prime the firing mechanism. There weren't many accessories released at the time that this blaster was released, so it didn't really impact things. But as soon as there were accessories and you loaded them on top of here, you quickly found out that it became very awkward to prime the gun to shoot it with whatever accessory it might be that you loaded on top of your gun. So definitely not great. Associated to that, it would have been really cool if they had simply moved the tactical rail from on top of the loading slide to the front of the blaster, because then you could have put an accessory on there and would have had no issues with loading the gun and using the accessory. And earlier I know that I said that one of the features I liked straight out of the box was the handle, but compared to models of Nerf blasters since this one was released, I have to admit that they've made progress on making grips and handles on many of their blasters that are more comfortable and more suitable to child and adult hands. So that's not necessarily a negative point in its favor, since it was before the time of the more recent blasters, but it is something that has been improved since. So I don't remember what was exactly listed on the box for this particular blaster, but I imagine the age appropriateness for this was started at a recommended 8 years, 10 years old, something like that. Now, I'm a parent. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I just, as a personal opinion, I would say that it's not unreasonable to let children that are under the recommended age play with these blasters, so long as you play with them, or at least an older sibling or cousin or somebody, just to make sure that there's someone around that knows how to use these safely and can help the kids in operating them. So for instance, this particular blaster, the Maverick, my 4-year-old can do a pretty good job of operating all by himself. He can manage to load the darts, he can load the priming mechanism, he can shoot, and he has a reasonable awareness that he's not supposed to shoot someone else or anything that might break or that mom and dad might not be impressed with him shooting. Whereas with my 2-year-old, this gun, a little too advanced, a little bit too heavy, maybe too strong of a spring pull on the loading mechanism, which is where you might move back to something like the Night Strike. I'm going to have a completely separate review of this blaster at some point, but just very quickly, my 2-year-old can manage to hold on to the blaster and load the mechanism, and it only has a 1 dart capacity at a time. So essentially what I'm saying is that if your child is right at the bottom of the age range or younger, the simplest thing to do is simply to play with your child. Help them learn how to use the blaster, how to use it safely, responsibly, and hopefully not damage it so that they can have it for a good long time. Final thoughts on the Nerf N-Strike Maverick. It's not exactly an easy blaster to locate these days at a reasonable price, but if you can lay your hands on one, it's a very reasonable starting blaster for any age-appropriate child, and as I said, can be used by children younger, just they need a little bit of a hand. It also doesn't shoot as hard as more modern Nerf blasters, so if it gets used in the house, it's less likely to necessarily break things or hurt someone if someone does get shot. So those are kind of positive aspects to it. And overall, it's just a very solid, enjoyable blaster to play with. Thank you for joining me for this first video from Toys and Karen, and just remember to get out there and build it, blast it, and enjoy it. If you liked this video and found it useful, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for notifications. I'm on social media at Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and I also have a blog at toysandtokaren.com, and all of this is listed in the description below.